If you immediately think of cheap, poor quality, and child labor when you hear China, then this video is for you. Not because you're poorly informed or because you don't know anything about China, but because you've been misinformed for decades by the government, by the media, and I would even say for good reason or even deliberately. I've been working in China for over 15 years, and in this video, we're going to clear up all the myths that simply don't exist in the real China. Because what I see is that the problem isn't China, it's you. You and your mindset. China has always been super cheap. However, that is not actually true. Especially in China, there is a common saying that goes, you get what you pay for. You get what you pay for. It may be super cheap, but it also has super great quality. I mean, so many brands that operate exclusively with production in China. Yes, for example, Apple, Samsung. There's a reason for that. It is not simply because the prices are so attractive, but rather because in terms of efficiency, manufacturing quality, and global supply chains, it is the perfect country, especially for electronic products. Yes, of course, getting things cheap is always possible, and you will always get a cheap product when you order something cheap. And when do you order cheap? Well, when do you think? When you lower the price, when you negotiate aggressively, then you get exactly what I already said. You get what you paid for. Anyone who chooses China just to buy cheaply almost always makes the wrong decision. China always produces poor quality, basically the old Temu quality. But that's not true either. China produces exactly according to your instructions, specifically exactly what you pay for. We already talked about this earlier in the first myth. Because the exact same factory in China can produce absolutely high quality for Apple and Samsung. But if you want, they can also deliver low-quality products. The only question is the price. So it's not a question of the country, it's a question of what are you willing to pay? What specifications do you give to the supplier? And do you even have any quality control? So if you say, just make me the same product but cheaper, then you will certainly receive it at a price where of course you can make some money. But only in the short term. Because by the third batch at the latest, your customers on Amazon will tear you apart with their reviews. And that of course means the end of your e-commerce career. So if you simply say, make it cheap, then you will get it cheap. If you don't clearly define things, you'll get random production. Therefore, the quality problems aren't actually in China, but rather in the management and the definition. Myth number 3. Your manufacturer is happy if you give him an order worth $10,000. $10,000 is not a real order for the manufacturer. That's just something to get to know each other. It's basically like a first date at Starbucks, because for real factories, orders below 50 or 60,000 euros are considered small volumes. That is the kind of thing that exists in the realm of prototypes, of test orders, or sometimes when we talk to our suppliers. They only process these specific orders as a personal favor for our team. Because what you have to understand is that the initial budget isn't really that interesting for the manufacturer. What's much more interesting for them are repeat orders, the prospect of scaling with good products and of course good quality, because the manufacturer also knows that if they deliver poor quality, they'll never get another order. Either you'll look for a new supplier as a customer, or you won't exist as a customer anymore. And of course, they need planning security. They want to know that you will be producing at least a certain quantity per month or per quarter. If you only produce small quantities, you'll also be given low priority. That's just business in China, and it's not meant as an affront. Myth number 4, children work in China. No, because there are extremely rigorous and thorough inspections in China. China is certainly no longer the Wild West, and in over 15 years of visiting Chinese factories to carefully monitor and inspect food production, I have never once encountered even a single child working there. And there were quite a few people working there whose IDs I personally asked to see, because I couldn't believe it. But all of them were at least 16, and over 80% of them were even over 18. They just simply look young. If you want to be completely and absolutely sure, you can ask to see audits. You can request official documentation, and you can be certain that authorities regularly visit these specific factories unannounced to check who is actually working there. Because what they definitely don't want is child labor or illegal workers who aren't even supposed to be in the country. And can you imagine what happens to a manager if the authorities find children in your production? I think you can shut down your factory immediately, and that's the end of it. And that brings us right to the next point. Just imagine for a moment that you place a very large order with a factory and they employ young children. And while that factory is busy working on your order, the local authorities suddenly show up and shut the entire place down because of illegal child labor. That means not only is the factory completely closed down, but you also will not be receiving your goods, and you don't get your deposit back at the end of the day. At Asiapro, we of course make sure that we only work with factories where we are certain that everything is above board, and you should do the same. And that's exactly why we have the factory audit at Asiapro. So we go into the factories unannounced and take a look. Who is actually working there? How is the work being done? What is the history? What kind of training program is in place before employees are allowed to work on your products? These are important questions that we ask. And as I said, we go in unannounced so they can't prepare for us. So if you don't check, you shouldn't be surprised if something goes wrong. But this isn't just a phenomenon in China, it happens all over the world. I've experienced it in Germany as well. Not exactly child labor, but all the other points I mentioned earlier in one sentence, I've actually encountered those at German production sites too. Myth number 5, it's about safety regulations and certificates. Export factories in China depend heavily on serving global clients and markets. Of course, they dedicate significant effort to ensuring that all regulations are followed, especially when they're producing for the crazy folks from Europe. Yes, they have CE and REACH compliance, they are ISO certified, very often BSCI audited as well, so that everyone can really be sure that everything is above board. And here too, it's of course your duty as a customer to first ask, do you actually have all the certificates? And if so, please have them provide you with a copy. A PDF sent by email is perfectly sufficient. You don't need to have the original signed in blood or anything like that. It's just about checking, okay, do such certificates exist? Are there such declarations that are important for your production, like CE, for example? Many manufacturing factories across China don't just process these raw materials without a proper REACH safety test for fun, for example. They often do it because you may have negotiated the final contract price way too hard for them to comply. And REACH-compliant material is simply more expensive than non-REACH compliant material. That goes without saying. So, the real problem doesn't start with the factory itself, but rather with you, specifically not briefing your specifications properly. If you clearly specify in your briefing that the product and every raw material used must be REACH compliant, then they will do it. And if you negotiate away your safety, then you won't get those results either. It's as simple as that. The 6th myth we will examine, the Chinese population lacks personal freedom, and therefore it is morally unacceptable to purchase or import goods from there. Business is not a discussion forum, and objectively speaking, everyday life, consumption, travel, and entrepreneurship function completely normally, just like in Europe. Maybe even a little better, because you get much more support from the government. They have your back much more. And as a general rule, as every single survey shows, the Chinese are consistently happier than Europeans. And under no circumstances should you start a political discussion with anyone, especially not with business partners. After all, they don't ask you whether it's actually true or not that there's absolutely no freedom of speech in Europe anymore, or that it actually takes us a total of 14 years to build an airport, or even as long as 18 years for a train station in Stuttgart, which, by the way, still isn't finished. The business landscape in China is performance-driven, very fast-paced, and extremely pragmatic. And political discussions definitely have no place in it. Any person who brings political expectations into your operational business, I am sorry to say, has completely lost their focus. Myth number 7. All Chinese suppliers are scammers. It's not China that's cheating, but rather the lack of due diligence that's the problem. If you give the manufacturer that much room for interpretation, they will take advantage of it. That can sometimes feel like being cheated. For us at Asiapro, it kind of feels like I'm having something produced that I have no idea about myself. Fraud exists in every market, and if there's an opportunity to interpret something the way one prefers because you allow for it, then that's exactly what will happen. They will take advantage of their benefit just as you would take advantage of yours. If you notice that your invoice is much lower than what you were actually supposed to pay, you're not going to go to Mr. Wong and ask him to make the invoice higher, just because a different price was originally agreed upon. You'll gladly accept it, and that's exactly what the Chinese suppliers will do as well. And just between us, 99% of all the frauds you think you've experienced are actually born out of misunderstandings, and that's often due to the different languages. And that brings us right to the next myth. I can get by everywhere with English, that's enough. It might be enough for casual conversation or for a first glance at a product specification, but not really to solve problems or to initiate a project that is supposed to take physical shape. Often they have basic knowledge, but for detailed negotiations or technical specifications, no, that simply isn't enough. Above all, you need good communication with the manufacturer. Always have very clear documents, very clear briefings, and clean translations, because the vast majority also do not have such explicitly good business English skills that they can accurately write down technical specifications. That means it is better for you if you write something in your own language, and then have it professionally translated directly into Chinese by an expert. Because you can't assume that your contact person at the factory is also the one operating the machines. That's almost never the case. And the person who operates the machines, the one who ultimately manufactures your product, in most cases doesn't understand any English. It's kind of like a game of telephone. You explain it to your contact at the factory, and your contact at the factory explains it to the production team. And so much can go wrong along the way. It's better if you have a direct written channel in Chinese. For example, at Asiapro, we do everything in Chinese. We don't communicate with the manufacturers in English. We know very well that it's risky. There is really a significant potential to lose a lot of money. So that is exactly why I can only recommend this. Either get yourself a highly skilled translator who can prepare the documents for the factory, or just come to us. Yes, of course, we also handle all of this in the local language for you. And always make sure to have structured processes. That means you start with the briefing, then comes the price negotiation, then the final price negotiation, and then it continues from there, step by step. And the manufacturer should already know in advance exactly what the individual steps are, so that he can roughly estimate what he's getting into when working with you. So anyone who thinks they can use Google Translate for their project management will quickly learn otherwise, and in a very expensive way. Myth number 9, China only copies, but that's not true. China actually does both. They copy, and they are significant innovators in their own right. Because even if they start by initially copying a good product idea one-to-one for the first production, they will introduce more and more improvements and refinements over the product's entire life cycle. That means the product is different every time and better every time. They move the market forward, and then, after they've introduced several innovations into a product, guess what happens next? Then a European retailer comes along and says, "That's an awesome idea, I want that too." And then the European retailer starts copying the Chinese innovation. I've talked to so many people who do exactly that, because by now I actually believe that it's not the Chinese who are the copycats anymore, but the Europeans. Customers come to us and say, "Hey, I have this great Amazon listing. I want that exactly the same, one-to-one. I've already checked with my patent attorney, and there really isn't a proper patent for it." And yeah, if someone ever comes along and wants to assert their rights, we'll find a way out of it somehow. The true primary driving force of all technological innovations isn't the Europeans anymore, and it's not the Americans either. Honestly, it's the Chinese now. Who has filed the most patents in the field of AI? Well, definitely not the Germans, and certainly not the Europeans. The Americans are, I think, in second place, and the Chinese are far, far ahead in first place. True innovation now belongs to China, and that's why you should absolutely not refer to the ancient Middle Kingdom as the world's workshop, because they haven't been that for a very long time now. So China is not a myth. China is a complex system. China represents both innovation and speed on steroids, and most of the problems I've mentioned here simply do not exist at all in China. They exist with you, at your desk, and in your head. So if you now replace those common misconceptions and myths with the facts I just explained to you, you'll have significantly less risk and uncertainty, better partners, and much more planning security. Let me know in the comments how you work with Asians and Chinese, and I think we're going to have a very interesting and lively discussion down there. See you in the next video. Adia!